so promptly as well. Welcome to this Fearless Futures webinar, DEI training, expectations, limitations, and pitfalls. I'm Sinead McInnes, a specialist facilitator with Fearless Futures. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm going to be in discussion today with Fearless Futures Chief Learning Officer, the amazing Sarah Shavesi, whose pronouns are she, her. So if you haven't engaged with us at Fearless Futures before, we serve daring companies across sectors ready to actively challenge inequities by addressing their roots, intersections, lived realities, highlighting challenges. We facilitate transformative equity and inclusion learning experiences, both in person and online, and partner with our clients through consultancy in service of designing equitable ecosystems for people and for products. So, before we get started, there are some key things to note for accessibility and participation today. So a reminder that closed captions are available. All you have to do is click on show subtitles in the bottom menu there, and they will appear immediately. This webinar is also recorded, so you can access it after the event, re-engage with anything you missed or want to spend more time with. That's there for you to watch again and again, as many times as you need. You can also, to engage with us, you can use the Q&A function in the bottom menu as well to share questions or to ask for further explanation on things that you want to know more about. After I've been in discussion with Sarah, we'll come to that, all those questions. So we'll come to that at the end of the discussion, at the end of the time today, and we'll try and answer as many of your questions as possible. So please do pop them in the Q&A and we'll try and get to them in the last 15 minutes or so. If you would prefer, you can listen to today's webinar without looking at your screen. There's going to be no slides or visual stimuli, so you can listen to us as the radio if you want. Okay. So getting started in this discussion and this conversation today. Because we at Fearless Futures have been running DEI education for some time, a long time now, we have learned a fair amount about what works and what doesn't work so well and why. And so that's what we're really going to dive into today. And you're going to leave us some really practical tips and tricks for designing and implementing DEI training that's actually effective and that actually creates real change. So I want to start with this, Sarah. What some of our audience may not know is that you started your journey as an educator, right? Before transitioning into DEI learning. So you were a secondary school teacher. So I'd love to start off by asking you, thinking about that previous career, are there any principles or tactics that you learned in the school classroom that you still use today in this work?
Gosh, Sinead, that's a bad question to ask me. I could speak for days and days on that. Firstly, hello everybody. It's lovely to be here with you and so great to be in conversation with the amazing Sinead. Yeah, so many things that I've brought over from the school classroom to DEI training. I think for the audience today, probably two things that I always say, my learning design team here we say a lot, are things that I learned training as a teacher and teaching in school classrooms that I see as absolutely essential to adult DEI training in any organization, regardless of size or sector. And those are sequencing, effective sequencing, and scaffolding. When I talk about effective sequencing, the great thing about when you're working in a secondary school is you spend so much time reflecting on and learning as a teacher how learning happens and what successful learning environments look and feel like and what they always require. And something you learn quite early on in that is that learning has to be very carefully sequenced to be effective. Often, teachers draw on a taxonomy called Bloom's taxonomy. It's not a perfect taxonomy, but the reason I'm mentioning it is because it's one of those tools that really reminds us that when you sequence learning, you have to make sure you're moving through specific steps and stages of learning to get folks to a position of mastery, that there's no shortcut. And something I see sometimes with DEI learning, which I totally understand, is this bias to action, this impetus to just do DEI learning that's all about practical action, practical action, practical action. Let's apply, do lots of application work. But you can't successfully apply if you don't have new knowledge and skills. What are you applying? How will you do anything differently? You can't fast forward to the practical action. And there are so many DEI kind of learning experiences I see out there where I understand that bias to action, because I understand people want something to do now. But if you just give people do nows, they'll know what to do in this very specific one moment, but they won't know why. So they'll have no flexibility in their ability to meet a moment where it's at and respond to it appropriately. So the first thing is sequencing. And I've got to say, for anyone who doesn't already know Bloom's taxonomy, I'll write it in the chat later. It's a tool that's used heavily in the secondary school classroom. And it really is about this idea. You first need to understand a concept, really, really get under the skin of it before you can possibly apply it successfully to master that skill, that there are no shortcuts. The second thing that I learned in the secondary school classroom, and my learning design team at Fearless Futures know I am obsessed with, is scaffolding. Scaffolding essentially is training wheels. It's the idea that when people are ready to apply their learning, they need something to hold on to. They can't just make the leap immediately. And that might be a schema, it might be a framework, it might be a step-by-step guide, but they need that to hold on to build the muscle to begin with, because it's a new skill, and to build their confidence as well with it. And I remember when I was a secondary school teacher and I was an English teacher, I'd be creating these schemas all the time of like, how do you analyze the poem? Step 1, step 2, step 3. And that's exactly like what you have to do in DEI learning. You have to give people the steps, the frameworks they can get started. In our, you know this, Sinead, in our Design for Inclusion program, we've got a framework for how do you have courageous conversations about inclusion with folks, both how do you receive that conversation and also how do you have that conversation. We have a framework and a schema for how do you build a policy in an inclusive fashion. People need something to hold to. So yes, scaffolding and really effective sequencing with no shortcuts is what I feel DEI learning always requires, and is actually tricks of the trade in teaching that I got from the school classroom.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, Sarah. I think, yeah, Bloom's taxonomy is something that I'm going to be going off and researching as well. And I know that for me, gaining new frameworks around this work completely revolutionized my ability to not only understand the issues at depth, but also gave me a way to articulate and communicate these to others robustly. And, we do need to spend time in those, getting to know them and practicing. But the hardest part is always starting, right? Mm-hmm. If someone is listening, or maybe not the hardest part, but it can feel like the hardest part, right? Beginning. If someone is listening or watching today and wants to know where they should start with DEI training, what would be your advice for that?
People are probably expecting me, Sinead, to say, do an investigation of where your problem areas are, where you could target DEI training, because if anyone's ever joined any training I've done before, you know I'm a massive proponent of you need to understand the problem before you can build a solution. So I do see value in that, but there is a step for me with DEI training comes before that investigation, has to come before it, which is ensuring that in your organization, you have a basic shared paradigm when it comes to DEI language and concepts. Why do I think that needs to come before you investigate your problem areas? Well, because you can't even have a discussion, whether that's kind of a live discussion, say your DEI committee, or maybe it's an en masse discussion via a survey. You can't have a discussion about what are our problem areas when it comes to DEI that we need to focus training on, when people do not have the same understanding of what equity and inclusion even mean. That you can't even use the word racism and people have the same understanding of what that is. The number of organizations I have worked with or observed or heard about that have progress stalled quite substantially because there is a lack of shared paradigm when it comes to DI in the first instance. Whether it's doing an investigation into what DEI training you need or setting a DEI strategy, first in your organization, you all need to be singing from the same hymn sheet. You all need to be talking from the same basic paradigm. So I would always say, to avoid confusion and conflict that can come up a lot, the first step of DEI training is start with basic literacy. Ensure that everybody is coming from the same paradigm in your organization. That might not be formalized training, that might be a resource that everybody engages with at some point. Then move into an investigation. What are our problem areas? Now we're all speaking about the same things, so we can accelerate here and we can actually have conversations about what our problem areas are effectively. What are our problem areas we need to focus on? And those will be so different depending on the organization. So some organizations, their problem area is HR and policy making. Their policies are not very inclusive. So what they need to do is look at trainings that upskills their HR leads and upskills those involved in policy making to build policies with inclusion at the root of them, at the core of them. In other organizations, it may be that what you find is there's this culture of fear. Folks are just scared to talk about inclusion, which is a really common thing in this work. And in which case you need to look at training that builds up people's confidence, gives them much higher literacy, but also critically gives them the opportunity and skills to practice talking about inclusion every day and calling each other in. Critically though, even though I'm saying you've got stage one, make sure you've got that baseline shared paradigm. Stage two, investigate what your problem areas are through dialogue across your organization. There will not be a silver bullet. There won't be one part of the organization that if you just focus DEI learning at them, you'll solve the problem. It's just never going to be the case because complex ecosystems require complex ecosystem solutions. And all organizations I've ever engaged with are complex ecosystems. So wherever you choose to start, you can't do everything. Wherever you choose to start, okay, we're going to focus our attention on this area and focus DEI training on this problem. Always knowing you're on a journey and you're going to need to look at the wider ecosystem and see what you might need to do in other spaces as well.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. It's kind of like this journey is a kind of consistent process, right? That never ends. Yeah, and I think it's really great also that you've brought in there this kind of myth of the silver bullet as well, that we're going to nail it and then that'll be it. And actually that's not the reality. It's this kind of constant incremental process, right? So yeah, I really hear that and how crucial it is to operate in this way, thinking about both those things you've said. But I guess there is lots going on for people and for organizations at the moment. So we know that budgets are tight right now. We're all under extra pressure to perform. Our time is just that bit more precious. So kind of taking into account everything you said there, but then also all of that, what does even a time-pressed DEI training have to include to be effective?
Yeah. Well, and I really hear you, Sinead, on that. I think that's a really important point. Like, not all DEI learning in any organization right now can be as long as and intensive as we all might hope it would be. I think whether DEI learning is 20 minutes, which I wouldn't always advocate for, but whether it's 20 minutes because that's all you've got, or it's 20 hours, it always needs to include two things. First one is what I kind of spoke to at the very beginning around sequencing. You have to ensure that you are giving folks new knowledge and skills. There has to be something in there that is a new knowledge or new skills that people can take away that changes the way they think and do. If you're not giving folks anything new to work with, you can't expect behavior change. It's just not possible. That people will ultimately go back to how they've done things before. So the first thing is you need those new skills and knowledge. That might look like just, one very small kind of new skill or one kind of clear knowledge point that people should be reflecting on. The other thing, though, always alongside that, for effective DEI training, regardless of the length of it, you need to have brave space and time for people to fail forwards, for people to practice using this new knowledge, these new skills in a way that feels safer than perhaps when they go out into their organizations and do so, and where they could get live feedback. Okay, you did it this way, that works quite well, but how about this next time? It's really, really important that both those elements are always there, that folks have the new skills and knowledge, otherwise there's nothing to apply, there's no new way of being or doing. There's also space to practice that, to build the muscle. Doing anything new, using any new knowledge or skills, as I assume everybody on this call will be able to relate to, can be really scary. But DEI learning particularly can be really hard. People can find it really scary to apply new learning and skills in their workplace. So you don't want the first time that they actually put this into practice, whatever it is you're teaching them, to be live in an exposing moment, say in a meeting of their organization. You want them to have time in the training with some support there in order to fail forwards and build the muscle. That's the only way that you can really build the confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that kind of shift in workplace conditions and cultures to allow for that, right? That's really important. Absolutely. Yeah, and that DEI work can feel really scary and heavy, you know, and actually to acknowledge that is really, really key. This kind of massive and understandable fear around getting it wrong, right? And that's why that brave space is so vital, to ensure that people don't stay frozen in one spot, afraid to move in any direction. Yeah, thank you. So what are some of the other pitfalls then that you see when organizations are rolling out DEI learning, and how do you think you can avoid those pitfalls?
So I've mentioned already, which I think is a really important one, this bias to action, this need to kind of rush forwards. And as I said, I understand it. I think it can come from really good intentions of, I want people to change their behavior and I want it to happen now, and people don't have a lot of time. But unless you spend the time around the why do people need to change their behaviors? Why does it matter? People will not have the flexible ability to show up for inclusion in different moments. And there are so many different ways in which they may need to. So you need to spend that time first. It's just simple kind of, you know, learning theory, exactly as I said at the beginning, that you can't master a skill unless you spend that time first really deeply understanding that skill and the why behind it. There's a couple of other things I see a lot that I'd love to touch upon. I think there's one thing I see quite often in organizations, which is a real pitfall. And again, I don't think comes from a bad place at all, which is where DEI networks, so employee resource groups, are responsible. They are the education hub for an organization. And I understand why it happens, because, you know, folks involved in networks tend to be super passionate. So, you know, they really do want to be part of the solution. And maybe more cynically, it is a very cheap solution. Okay, we've got folks within the organization that can kind of do this educating. But there's two ways I think that's really problematic. The first one is from a simple effectiveness level. And I say this a lot. So folks, if you've been to an event I've done before, you may have heard me say this. Just because somebody is from a marginalized community doesn't mean they're a DEI expert. They are an expert in their lived experience, and that is extremely valuable. But we all know there is no single story with any marginalization. So one person's lived experience, even a small group of people's lived experience, will never be the full story. So I really, really think it's important that we hold on to the idea that DEI expertise and capability isn't the same thing always as being from a marginalized community. So that's just an effectiveness issue. Like, will the training be effective if it's run by your ERGs solely? And I'm not saying it won't be, but I'm saying that's a question you have to ask. But the second thing is a signaling issue. What does it say to your broader organization? The onus for change, the responsibility for education lies with those from marginalized communities. What does that actually say to everybody else? I think that's a really powerful thing. So that's a pitfall I see a lot. And like I say, I understand where it comes from. Your ERGs in any organization, your networks, are incredibly important agitators, advocates, mobilizers. of people. They are so important in any DEI training rollout. You need to go to them and get them to be the ones that are encouraging people to sign up for these programs, that are telling people what they'll get from this journey. You want them to be a part of that, but they shouldn't be the driving force only. It's really important that they shouldn't. And something to ask yourself in that moment is, instead of that, are there leaders in your organization with extreme kind of both soft power and hard power, kind of access to resource, that could be the right people to be leading the charge with DEI training? That, for instance, if they go through it first and put, say, for example, a video on your internal intranet, are going to really raise the curiosity level in the organization and encourage other people to do it. But it also will be signaling the importance of this training, because look, you know, they're in a leadership position and they're doing it. And we'll be signaling the responsibility, where the responsibility lies. The other pitfall, there's a few, but I'm trying not to go too far down the negative road. The other pitfall I do want to talk about is where DEI training is set up as a debate. And this is really common in our culture, right? You know, on the news, television programs, everywhere, right? We see that issues related to DEI can be set up as a debate. Debates are hotly contested, involve trying to convince people of your argument, and usually involve winners and losers. I mean, that's just never going to be, from my viewpoint, and a lot of learning theory, that's just never going to be an effective mode of learning anyway. But I would say particularly with DEI learning, which is learning that already people are going to turn up with strong emotional relationships with the content for a range of different reasons, that setting that up as a debate is just not going to be effective. You can't change behavior and ways of thinking through setting people up as oppositionally. It's just never going to be successful. But the other thing is, and again, I'm kind of going back to exactly what I said about ERGs, there's a real signaling piece with this, I feel. What does it say to marginalized communities within your organization that their access to opportunities, to safety, to legitimacy, to belonging is up for debate from other people who perhaps have no relationship with the marginalization they go through? What does that say to them about your commitment to them being a part of your organization, being an included part of your organization? So I understand where it comes from, because we see it everywhere, this hotly contested debate. And I think also there are some people that really love a debate, right? They love to get into the weeds of it. You know, I've met people, we all have, maybe even some people today are those people. And I get that. It's never going to be an effective learning tool. It just is not effective. But particularly with DEI learning, you need to present DEI learning as, and we say this at Fearless Futures, don't we, a lot, a discipline. DEI learning is a discipline, because when you present it in that way, what you're signaling is there is a commitment to it, and there are things people can actually do. It's not about just a viewpoint. There are things people can be actually doing every single day, skills and tools and knowledge people can be deploying to further inclusion in your organization. So referring to it as a discipline, like engineering or literature, shows that this is a serious area that we take extremely seriously. It's not just one person's opinion over another. And it also involves something really robust you can take away and do that can change the way you operate in the world. So I think that's really key. So those are my two pitfalls. Really rethink, should you use your ERGs in this process? Like, is that the right thing to do? I'm not saying leave them out of the process entirely, but really think about whether or not they should be central to it. And then secondly, I really do think you need to rethink if you're setting it up as a debate, even if people would enjoy that, or some people would enjoy that. We've got to remember, all learning is not just about making people entertained or comfortable. That's not necessarily what all learning is about. Learning is about changing the way people think and do. And that sometimes has to be taken a bit more seriously.
Yeah, so crucial, isn't it? Framing the learning in that way as a discipline, and not a discussion or debate, or kind of setting up a talking shop. and actually recognizing that needs to be, that it is a robust discipline. It kind of completely shifts the learning then in that sense, and I think creates that shared paradigm between people, in the same way that when everyone has the language and the knowledge and the understanding, they can move forward together. Absolutely. Excuse me. So, and also I think I love that you've brought in the stuff about the ERGs, interrogating where the onus for change lies, thinking about who the burden tends to fall to, who is not having to put the work in. And I think, you know, it's really great to kind of highlight that leaders modeling learning behaviors, accountability, responsibility, vulnerability, even in DEI work, is just creates a massive shift as well. So yeah, I love that. And this is probably the £1 million question. So you've kind of talked about the pitfalls to avoid there. Say we've avoided them, but then how do we get DEI learning to stick, to create real, deep, consistent change in an organizational ecosystem?
Oh, the stickiness of learning. The £1 million, $1 million question. I think it kind of comes back to, Sinead, what you said at the beginning about the continuousness. And I do think that is, look, every single person who is listening right now, including myself and you, Sinead, will have a memory of a course you did in school, college, university, wherever it might have been. Maybe it was a year, maybe it was less than a year, maybe you had an exam at the end. We'll all have a memory of something we've studied that we don't remember at all. It's quite horrifying actually sometimes when I remember parts of, you know, things that I did the entire course on that, but I don't remember it. And that's kind of an indictment of what happens when learning is done badly. And that's really the same with DEI learning. If we just do it and then drop it and it's over, and we are not reusing it, revisiting it, consolidating, refining over time, it will do something in the immediate term, and then it will ebb away, just as we've all experienced in our own lives with things that we've studied. So the most important thing to make DEI learning stick is it has to be something that you're coming back to again and again and again. What I'm not saying there is that it's lots and lots of formalized learning over a period of time. I think that model actually is quite interesting sometimes, but I appreciate that's just not always possible in organizations. What I mean there is, after you've done some really robust formalized DEI learning in your organization, you've invested that time in your staff, that money in your staff. The next thing has to be, what is the infrastructure I'm building around this? That means people are consistently revisiting it and using the skills from it explicitly. And there's a range of ways that you can do that that are very self-generated. You know, you don't have to outsource them, you don't have to pay anybody else to do them, that you can be really smart about to ensure that that learning is continuing. One thing I love is action learning sets. So where a group of people say they've done a formalized DEI learning program, every 2 to 3 months afterwards, they come back together and they use the tools of the program to interrogate a shared problem. So maybe everyone submits a problem before, something they've seen live in their work. Somebody in my organization is, you know, doesn't seem to be able to pick up the usage of pronouns in meetings, so is consistently resisting that. Or, you know, a different problem, we've created a new product design process, but we realize that consistently the products that we're putting out to market are speaking to very limited audiences in terms of white, cisgendered folks, etc. It might be a product issue, it might be a people issue. You bring it to the group, submit beforehand, the group decides on the problem they're going to work on because it's relevant to most people in the group, and then using the tools and skills of whatever training they've done, they solution together. And that this is something that's ongoing. It happens again and again and again. So that even if people aren't, it's not always front and center every single day in everything people are doing. And we hope that's the case with DEI learning, but we have to be honest that people's time and energy is taken in so many different directions that instead there's these moments in time where they consistently have to come back to the principles of the learning that will make it resurface, and the ripple effects will then be seen in their behavior and the decisions that they make thereafter. So I think that is one thing you can do. Action learning sets are so profound and so useful. But you can also do it, I mean, there's other ways you can do this to continue that learning, to make sure it's being consolidated and refined over time. So something that I'm thinking about also is, and again, I've seen this done, and I think this is brilliant, is, you know, you might have a quarterly all hands meeting or all team meeting where everyone comes together. Maybe it's a it's a big meeting en masse, your whole organization. And in that meeting, 15 minutes every quarter is dedicated to coming back to learning DEI learning you've all done. So say you did a formalized DEI learning program, and then for 15 minutes in every all hands, maybe you watch a little video, listen to a clip from a podcast, you read a short article, all of you together, no pre-work needed because folks won't do it, and then you're in trouble. Some people will, but not everybody will. Live watching something, listening to something, reading something, and then you have a live discussion about it using the knowledge and skills from your DEI training. So you're bringing it back up. And the great thing about doing that all together in something like an all hands is it's really showing how important it is within the business. This is so important that we put it on the agenda for a strategic meeting because we should be coming back to it. But it also means you're consistently doing shared learning. You're getting to learn from one another over time. But the most important thing for me for DEI learning to really stick is that it has to have that infrastructure around it. It really has to have that infrastructure around it. There was one other thing I wanted to say though on this as well, and we see this, Sinead, I'm sure you see this a lot with the Design for Inclusion program, right? When we deliver the Design for Inclusion program, which is our kind of flagship program at Fearless Futures. And really, what I feel is effective about that program, what makes learning really, really stick, is with DEI, people don't know what they don't know. So often we do operate in a world where people can assume, and it doesn't come from bad intentions or arrogance, but can assume, oh, I kind of get it. I get that we should be respectful to people. I get that we should, you know, make sure everybody in our organization feels good and feels they can thrive and so on. But actually, when we're talking about DEI in a really effective way that creates real change, we have to go to the systems level. It's not just about how we all behave as individuals. That matters, but there are whole systems and structures within our organizations, within our society, that further exclusion and oppression every day. And unless we redesign those, oppression will continue, even if individual behaviors change. And so it's really, really critical that you have moments where you open people's eyes to what they don't know. And for me, that's opening their eyes to what they don't know at the systemic level. At that level of, oh, I realized individuals could further this, but I didn't realize that actually the way our recruitment process operates, or our annual reviews and how we do them, or the way we run events and meetings, that those structures in our organizations can be furthering inequity as well. For me, that's how you get really sticky, exciting learning. So when you open people's eyes to an area that they didn't know about, they didn't even know existed before, and allow them to suddenly think and do in a whole new space. And I think that's the thing with DEI learning. As I said, I think a lot of people understand it as mostly about individual behaviors. So they're like, oh, I feel like I'm a good person, and I feel like I behave okay. But when you take it up to that level, and what about the things, the processes, the structures, the policies that we construct, suddenly you're opening people's eyes to what they didn't know about. And learning is really sticky and memorable when it makes us stop, when it shifts how we see something. And that's exactly what happens 9 times out of 10. I'm sure you've had this experience when people take it from the individual level to the structures level. Suddenly it's this moment that they're not going to forget, because suddenly they're being faced with, I didn't know that all of this existed, and that this is how inequity can show up as well. And this gives me a whole new terrain within which I can create change.
Love that. Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. I think because obviously I, through facilitation, can observe that happening, but also that happens to me. That's happened to me, and that continues to happen to me. And those real kind of light bulb moments shift everything and kind of shine this different light on an issue which, you know, I've been doing this work for years on an issue which I think I may know everything about. And I never assume that, but there are those moments where, you know, everything shifts and transforms for you because you're looking up here as well. And I think the more knowledge and learning we can do about systems, the better and better we're going to be at these inclusion efforts. And I also love the idea of normalizing the shared learning, embedding that. You know, I think that then that just becomes a part of your organization, that becomes a part of your work life. And the more that happens, the more normalized it is, and people expect that. And that's just the way it operates. And that is just always going to be great. And, you know, if we don't practice, then how do we grow? As you're speaking there, I'm just thinking about like training at the gym or doing a sport or something. You know, you can keep going for 2 months, and then you stop for 6 months, and then you go back and you're like, oh no. And I think that is how it is, right? It's like flexing that muscle. Absolutely.
I love that. I really love that analogy. I think that's absolutely bang on. It's like, if you don't flex the muscle, it will become weird and difficult and way more challenging. And that's exactly why, I love what you said, normalize it. This is just part of business. This is something we talk about all the time. It's something we come back to all the time. It doesn't have to be hours and hours every week. It's just those moments that you're kind of drip feeding it back into people's consciousness.
Yeah, absolutely. So effective. I wish we could continue this conversation, because it's been so rich. And, you know, we discussed the opportunities, the needs, pitfalls, and also the possibilities of DEI learning, which I think, you know, you went into in such great depth there as well. So thank you so much, Sarah, for all your expertise and knowledge and sharing that with us today. So before we go to a Q&A, which I'm excited about, just a reminder for everyone watching, if you want to come back to anything that has been said from this webinar, you can just go to our website to rewatch it anytime. So you don't have to memorize everything that Sarah's just said. You can go back and highlight particular bits that you want to look more into. And before I actually start reading out questions, everything we do is also iterative, right? So we are going to ask for some feedback. Please do fill that in. That's going to be dropped into the chat, a survey link now. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Shauna, who's under the banner Fearless Futures, who I actually forgot to introduce. I'm so sorry, Shauna. We'll drop into the chat a form for us to fill in for feedback there. So if you all could open that up. It's very short. Fill it in, let us know. The good, the bad, the ugly. We want it all. And I'm going to come to your questions. I'll let you open that up. Okay. I'm just reading through. Okay, so the person has said, love this. I'm not sure what that was referring to. So I didn't see it at the moment, but great question. I tend to find people are often very defensive when challenged. How do we help here? That's such an important question. I love that. Sarah, what do you think? What do you think about that defensiveness?
Defensiveness is so normal in DEI learning. We all come to it with lots of different viewpoints and emotional states. And I just want to say, I think sometimes when we're doing DEI learning and we're confronting the reality of inequity and oppression, we're sometimes faced with our own complicity, and that can be really scary and can bring up feelings of, you know, I'm a bad person, I've done something bad, and that's really understandable. There's two ways I think that we can really reduce that defensiveness, because whilst it's understandable, it's also really not conducive to good learning. Defensiveness in all of us can bring up behaviors that shut us down, that stop us from hearing and listening and changing. The first thing is, that I think is so important with that defensiveness, is reminding people that oppression and inequity are normal, and all of us have the capacity, not just have the capacity, will mess up and further these systems of oppression. We've been taught in our culture that racism, sexism is the behavior and the outcome of a few bad apples that just apparently get everywhere. That's not true. These systems are through the behaviors, the structures, the policies, the institutional practices of many, many actors simultaneously across our society, some of whom may even have good intentions and be behaving in this way. And so we really need, and we do this in our Design for Inclusion program a lot, but we really need people to understand the sheer volume of these systems of oppression, and the idea that there's not one evil person running around doing lots of bad things. All of us are furthering these systems every day. And by the way, that even includes folks from marginalized communities, right? Because we can live with marginalization and simultaneously have access to privilege in certain aspects of our identity. So I'm, as a woman of color, I can simultaneously do things that further the oppression of, for example, trans and non-binary folks as a cisgender woman. I can do that. And I probably have done that in my life, right? And these are things we need to really normalize through the DEI learning process, that it is normal to mess up on these issues. It is normal, it will happen. And so what we need to focus on is how you course correct and do better next time, rather than the idea that there's this terrible, terrible group of people doing all these things and everybody else is a saint, because it's not true. And it just furthers this idea that, oh my God, I'm a terrible person then if I've done one of these things. No, you're somebody that lives in a society where this is the air we breathe. And actually, you therefore just need to work harder, draw on some new tools to do better. So I think that's one thing we can do. The other thing about defensiveness that comes up through these programs and through the training that we do is you really need to orient people, ground people in why they are doing this training. Why does it matter to them? That for me is the most powerful tool to disperse this defensiveness. Sometimes in a moment we can get like, that really tight feeling of, oh my God, you're telling me I'm a bad person. I don't like this. I'm having to engage with my own complicity. But then why are we here? Why are we taking the time to do this training? And this is why we never encourage mandatory DEI training. There's a lot of research on it. Mandatory training does not work in the DEI space. Don't do it. But really, people need to have self-selected to be there. But it's about ensuring they can go back to their why. And we do this in all of our training. We have this activity that is just about your why. Why are you here? Why are you committing the time to this? Why does it matter? And for different people, that will be different. For some people, it's, I want to be a good line manager. For some people, it's, to be honest, I think it's really important for our clients and our customers. So I want to make sure I'm producing products that speak to that. It can be so different for different people, but getting them to tap back into their why is really important to dispel that defensiveness. I could keep going on this one, but I'm aware there's lots of other questions, so I'm going to stop and hand back to you, Sinead.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think once we recognize our own complicity in systems as inevitable, actually, it just revolutionizes the way we can do this work. And I think, it's the same again that you said before about bringing it to a systems level, and that kind of allowing us to do that. And I also love that you brought in there intention versus impact, and that often our intention can be misaligned with our impact, right? Very much so. And we live in a world where we always hear people justifying their intentions, right? When they've done something wrong, right? You hear it in politicians, everyone does it. We see it on the media all the time. It was not my intention. It was not my intention. But when we shift that to putting more of the onus on the impact, well, everything changes then, right? And I think that's so powerful, and it sounds so simple. But it's just, it's a wonderful tool for us to have, and kind of moving away from punitive conditions as well, which I think is so important. And also, mapping our why. Why do we care? Why are we here? What does this mean to us? Because everyone will be able to answer that. Yeah, as you said, there could be many different answers, but everyone will have an answer for why they're there, for sure. Yeah, thank you for that. Such a rich and meaty question that I wish we had all day. Okay, let me come back to these questions. So there's a few questions here about, do we have DIY resources, or what DIY resources exist to help people establish these basic shared paradigms that you've talked about, Sarah, or a list anywhere of different ways to implement that infrastructure that you talked about as being so important? What can we offer people in that sense?
Yeah, so I think when I said that shared paradigm at the beginning, I would advise, surprise, surprise, coming from me, I would advise doing that through a formalized learning. It might not be live learning, it might be some sort of e-learning or something that just gives people the shared understanding, that initial language and conceptual understanding. So when people are talking about inclusion, pronouns, racism, we're using that language in a shared way. But another way you can do that is to go to resources. There's so many, I mean, I couldn't possibly do justice to this right now, but there's so many incredible resources out there that are, for example, glossaries. So LGBTQIA+ glossaries that exist on what language you should be using when talking about individual members of communities within the LGBTQIA+ community. Or there are incredible resources out there around what privilege is. What is privilege? What is power? And understanding those as basic concepts that can get you on the road. Another concept I'd say is really important as an introductory concept. What is intersectionality? Now, the truth of the matter is there isn't a single place where all these things are together for you to go and access them, which I know it makes it a harder job. That's what we've done in our programming, is brought them all together. But of course, it doesn't exist in the wonderful world of the internet, just one page, one place. But I do think some of the key things to look for are, what is the language that people should be using? So inclusive language across identities. Are there glossaries you can find? There are incredible organizations out there that will have on their websites kind of either things you can download or just things you can kind of copy over from their websites on the best language to use in reference to different communities, but also looking for introductory resources, perhaps like Peggy McIntosh's on privilege and power, and also looking at Kimberly Crenshaw's work on intersectionality, some really simple basic understandings of what privilege is, what intersectionality is, and what language you should be using is a brilliant starting point. Those are the places I would definitely go.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. I think, for example, for intersectionality and Kimberly Crenshaw, you can go and watch her 20-minute TED Talk about the urgency of intersectionality, and it will kind of blow your mind in 20 minutes. And, you know, really just that one thing, it's like you said, 20 minutes, you know, that's something, as long as we are choosing those things wisely, right? And I would also say you can sign up to the Fearless Futures newsletter as well, which has loads of resources. If you just go on the website, you can sign up to that as well. And like, maybe you're already signed up, but you can go and do that as well. So there's something also that's come through about, that you mentioned there, mandatory DEI training and its effectiveness or not. So I'd love you to talk a bit more about what you think about that, how you feel about mandatory training.
Yeah, it really depends on the type of DEI training you're doing, in my view. So if you're running something like an e-learning, so for Fearless Futures, we have a 2-hour e-learning, it's self-led, people do it in their own time, across a period of time. I would be more open to something like that being mandatory because it's alone. So if somebody's really resistant to the very, you know, notion of DEI, they're working through that alone. But when it comes to live cohort training, the reason why, and there's actually various reasons why, but the main reason why I found in my experience mandatory training is problematic is because it means you have people in the space who actively do not want to be there, and their behaviors and attitudes will show up and influence the learning of other people and impact the learning of other people. And we have all seen this in different, DEI spaces. I remember the early years of Fearless Futures when I worked with a client, we did do mandatory training, and I was sat in the room, and the behaviors of some people who were very resistant, they did not want to be there. They had other things they felt were better use of their time, and they were fundamentally against DEI training. Just made the learning environment untenable. It was totally untenable, and people who really wanted to learn in the space were consistently having to try and convince their colleagues. So spending time instead growing their own capability, or instead spending it trying to convince their colleagues why they should just be in the room. So it just does not work, folks, with cohort learning. The culture it creates in the room is really uncomfortable and not conducive to good learning. But also there's another reason why it's just actually, it's not even that it's not useful, but it's just not necessary. And the other reason why is ultimately, to create change within an ecosystem, you need a critical mass, but you don't need everybody, or at least that's what, critical mass theory dictates. But actually, as long as you've got a group of loud, influential, eager advocates that first go through this training, then create curiosity that ripples across the wider community and brings other people in, actually those people who are really, really resistant, one of two things will happen to them in that process. They'll grow quite curious because everybody else is doing something and they're talking very positively about it and they're using it, and suddenly, peer pressure is a real thing. They'll move into it themselves, but because they've self-selected, they'll be far more open to the learning. Or they will self-select out entirely from the ecosystem, which for your organization, if they fundamentally are not on board with that agenda, may be the right choice for you. But what it doesn't do is put you in a position of consistent conflict with these folks. In DEI work, I cannot emphasize enough, you do not want to be spending your time and energy, your limited time and energy and budget quite often, on people that don't want to do the work. It's an uphill struggle. You might change them by a small percentage. You could be spending that time, energy, and effort on folks that are ready to do the work, upskill them, give them the capabilities so they can go out into the community of the organization, create ripple effects, create real change and a new direction of travel. So I cannot emphasize enough, at Fearless Futures, we don't encourage DEI training to be mandatory, and we really don't think it's effective. Saying that, there are some really smart and canny ways you can softly encourage people to do this training, both through building up their curiosity and possibly connecting it also to what is seen as valuable in your organization. Remember I said earlier, if you have a leader, really influential leader of a team that goes through formalized DEI training and then speaks to the rest of the team about it and encourages them to do it, well, people are going to see that it's valuable, that it's connected to leadership, that it's something that is seen as, people within the organization really see as a good thing, and maybe people who therefore align themselves with it are more likely to progress. So there's soft ways that you can do that. Yes, I will stop there. Sorry, I got very excited about that question, Sinead.
That's fine. No, it's great. It's great to listen to that. Yeah, absolutely. I think we've got time for another question, and it's quite a big question. So someone has put in the chat that the point on EDI learning being set up as a debate is really fascinating. What would you recommend in terms of frameworks for training on protected characteristics that have a sort of polarity in their approaches? So for example, at the moment, all over the media is trans rights and then the gender critical movement, right? So that's everywhere, set up as a debate. How do we then come to the workplace and create something different to what's happening out there when that's really infiltrating in?
The key thing with this is you do not set up the DEI training in line with the themes of these debates. You set it up in line with the themes, the deep themes of inclusion that are a discipline, active themes. So rather than, here's an example, rather than we're going to talk about we're going to talk about police violence towards people of colour, in this particular session, setting up, that's the framing, that's the whole session. Rather than that, what we're talking about is, what are the steps you need to take to be an anti-racist? See how those two things are very different in terms of thematically. One is speaking to something that in our culture is seen as a debate, and one is setting out as, no, there's a specific way you can do this. Now, when you're talking about anti-racism, you may therefore spend some time talking about the history of racism towards, for instance, Black communities in the UK, US, wherever it might be, and you may therefore touch upon police violence, the way in which the state can sanction that violence. You may touch upon that through that process, but your focus is not on that issue, which is polarized in our society. It's focused on the theme of anti-racism, which is a doing theme. How do we do that? The steps that are required. So rather than, let's talk about the debate in terms of gender critical, as you've said, gender critical beliefs and trans rights, actually what we're going to talk about is gender norms, and gender-based oppression. And gender-based oppression impacts women, and it impacts, when we talk about women, it impacts cis women, it impacts trans women, it impacts gender-based oppression, it impacts non-binary people as well. So we are looking expansively at communities that are impacted by that. So the first thing I'd say on this is, don't set it up in terms of the framing as in line with whatever the media debate is, but instead the skill or the knowledge you want people to have. The other thing I have to say on this though is, with DI work, sometimes you do just have to say to people, and no one's going to want to hear this from me, but it's the truth, if you want to do this work well, sometimes you are going to have to say to people, this whole thing that's in the media, we're not going to talk about that here. Or we are going to talk about it, but we are going to deconstruct it, and not everything that everybody believes in it we are going to see as valid or acceptable. And I know that's really, really hard, right? But ultimately, if you want inclusion in your organization and you do want safety, legitimacy, belonging for everybody, there are some viewpoints in the world that people may freely share on television, online. If you allow them to fester and prosper in your organization, will limit the freedom of other people, will limit the safety of other people. And so one of those is any viewpoint that essentially denies trans and non-binary folks their humanity. Any viewpoint that does that, or suggests that their very existence is somehow dangerous, any viewpoint that does that is making trans and non-binary folks in your organization unsafe. Sometimes in our DI work, we have to set out lines in the sand. I know that's so hard. I know everybody wants to say anyone can just say anything. You know, it's kind of that there's a freedom within that. If you really want inclusion in your organization, sometimes you are going to have to, through your DEI learning, be really clear on this is what inclusion looks like. And sometimes it looks like saying to somebody, actually, no, there's what you've just said, there is a problem with this, and here's why. Sometimes learning requires people understanding why there's a negative impact to something they say or do. So I do think there's a side to this. One is just how you couch the whole process of learning, and making sure you're not couching it in line with these provocative debates, but you're couching it in line specifically with themes and ways of doing. And you might cover then these polarizing areas, but through that process. And secondly, in DEI learning, we just have to be really clear that sometimes there are lines in the sand we have to set up for people. And it might be hard for people to hear, but it will be really, really useful for them to actually understand what inclusive thinking and doing actually looks like. Because it doesn't look like, for any of us, just saying whatever we like. It doesn't look like that. That's not inclusion. For many people, that's not inclusion, because we can limit the freedom, safety, and belonging of other people.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm aware of time, so I'm going to stop myself there.
No, it's great. And I think, you know, sometimes those really simple questions are so effective. Well, where is harm actually happening when we talk about this in this way? Have you thought about those who are being harmed? You know, what does that look like or feel like for them? And I think that's another shift, right? If people haven't thought about that really. And I think kind of saying, is it unsafe? for those people in this environment, in these conditions. And yeah, it's kind of that fostering that empathy as well. And I think it's again that, like you said in your first point, is that zooming out and looking beyond the debate that's in the media and so on and so forth, right? That is very harmful, and looking at this as gender-based oppression, zooming out in that way, looking at that as a system. Well, that's so effective, particularly when we see how these oppressions between cis women and trans people and non-binary people are all connected. And so, yeah, that's really, really, really important point. And that grounding in frameworks as well will just revolutionize everything. Thank you for that. It was a really rich answer to that question, Sarah. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, for those wonderful questions as well. This has been such a brilliant conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed hearing your questions from the Q&A, and also hearing all your expertise, Sarah. It's been wonderful. A reminder, if you haven't, to open up that feedback form and fill it in for us, please. We do really appreciate all the feedback that we get from you, and we do read it and we do use it. So please do that for us. Remember, you can access this webinar and also other Fearless Futures webinars and free learning content via our website. We're also running more webinars like this on other DEI areas of interest. So please come along, invite your colleagues to come along. On the 6th of July, there is one called From Recruitment to Retention, Amplifying Equity in the Promotions Process. Really, 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 really important. So also, if you're interested in our really robust Fearless Futures training, we've got our flagship in-person Design for Inclusion program in London, the first week of July from the 4th to the 6th. The DFI is a wonderful program. I've facilitated it many times, and it is just every time it's heavy and it's hard, but it's a joy as well. Folks, stay in touch. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, tweet us, send us messages, find us on LinkedIn. Sarah's on her email at sarah@fearlessfutures.org. Any questions, anything you need, we'd love to hear from you. So thank you, and thank you for showing up today.